Good day, viewers, and thank you so much for joining us once again. My name is Madeline Gassis, and I will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. Right, so today we're going to be talking about the legalization of abortion in Namibia. But before we do that, stay tuned for our daily promo ad.
You see me through a filtered lens, fading the edges of my flaws, reminder of my innocence before it got lost so deep in the forest of our youth. We carved our names upon a tree, inside a heart that spoke the truth. I still hear it beat.
Thank you so much for staying tuned, viewers. So today on our panel discussion, we are joined by three lovely panelists. Would you kindly introduce yourselves? We'll start here with you, Doctor.
Yes, my name is Dr. David Mvola. I'm a specialist obstetrician and gynecologist, both in public and private sector.
Hello.
Thank you. My name is Ndilokelo Antengwe, and I'm with the Voices for Choices and Rights Coalition.
Thank you so much. Pastor?
My name is Lawrence Ranga Kodasike, a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Republic of Namibia, serving currently the Macedonia Parish in Katutura Windhoek.
Thank you so much for joining me here today. As I mentioned before, our topic of discussion today is the legalization of abortion in Namibia, because it has been quite a hot topic, I must say. So I actually just want to read the viewers something today. The World Health Organization has urged member states, including Namibia, to address unsafe abortions as a major public health issue. The World Health Organization statistics have found that in countries where abortion is legal, unsafe abortions account for 12 per 100,000 women. In countries where abortion services are restricted or banned, unsafe abortion rates are almost twice as high. Right? You would think that in a country where abortion isn't legal, it would probably be happening less, but it's actually the opposite that's happening. So my first question is, Doctor, I'll start with you. Do you think that abortion should be legalized, and why?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madeline, for hosting me and also for the question. Yes, we are very much aware that this past week there has been a public hearing regarding this topic. And I would want to approach it from the professional point of view as a medical doctor. Because if you ask me that question on my personal capacity, I might have my own personal opinion, in which I think that is reserved. But when it comes to the professional point of view, as you have just highlighted with the statistics, and the numbers don't lie, they tell the facts, they are factual. There's no doubt that, as you just highlighted, that in countries where there is a termination of pregnancy or abortion is unlegalized, as per se, it is happening actually twice as high compared to the countries where it is legalized. So the point of the discussion from our side now as clinicians is that how does this affect us as clinicians, and also how does it affect the community? From the clinical point of view, we see women dying as a result of these consequences. There is no doubt that unsafe termination of pregnancy comes with a morbidity. Morbidity means that it affects the livelihood of the woman after the incident, which means they may become disabled. That is what we refer to as morbidity. Or it may even, if in worst case scenarios, results in death. So for us, and if we are to go into statistics and look at the countries that previously had termination of pregnancies, where it was not legal or it was illegal, and they went on to to revise their laws to become more liberal and otherwise legalize termination of pregnancy, obviously up to a certain gestational age in most cases. What we have seen is that, and these are the factual statistics, that those countries significantly they reduce their maternal mortality rate. And for us, the maternal mortality rate, it means it's a number of women that are dying per 100,000 of all the live births that are delivered in a country. And they are very significant, they are indicators of how the health of the current status, quality of health that is being provided. So yes, from the clinical point of view, if we as clinicians, we want to preserve life, we have seen the effects of legalizing termination of pregnancy. Significantly, they drop the number of the women that are dying as a result of this, and these are facts. And the other point is that if you now legalize termination, will it completely prevent women from performing unsafe termination? And the answer is obviously no. And you have just alluded to earlier that if the countries that are also having legalized termination, there is still a unsafe termination of pregnancies that is happening. So, but what we have seen is that it does really significantly reduce the number of the women that are dying, and it does significantly reduce the number of women that are disabled. Because what happens in unsafe termination is that this termination of pregnancies, they are done in an unsterile manner. Sterility means that it's a clean environment, as in theater. We know that theater is meant to be clean to prevent infections. And it's obviously often performed by unqualified people. So if it can then happen that we reduce that number of people going to those areas where they feel like they have unintended pregnancy, we've seen that termination of pregnancy per se does not really kill the patient if it's performed under sterile condition, if it's performed by the skilled clinician. But if it goes on to be performed by an unskilled person and also under unsterile condition, it is very dangerous. The complications that comes with it is what leads to women dying. So to summarize up, I would say that from the clinical point of view, there is benefits in legalizing termination, specifically to reducing the number of women dying.
Okay, Dilo?
Yeah, so I think I want to just contextualize it much further. Abortion is legal in Namibia, but under very strict
Specific
conditions,
rates,
very
yes,
much
yes,
so.
yeah.
And I think our point of view is to say that, yes, it must be legalized in such a way that it doesn't feel so restrictive anymore. And that's why we come to the point where it's either you decriminalize it completely, repeal it, and replace it with a law that goes beyond, for example, the Maputo protocols, and continues to affirm and uphold the human rights, the fundamental human rights of women, as they are all entitled to. And when we're saying we need to liberalize the law, we're looking now at the conditions or the steps that it takes to obtain an abortion. I think I want to piggyback off what Doctor said in coming to the steps. For example, under the Abortion and Sterilization Act of 1975, you need two medical doctors in the case of rape or incest. And these two medical doctors, they should have been practicing for at least 4 years, I think between 2 to 4 years. And they can't be practicing they can't be employed by the same employer or in the same partnership. They also need, these two doctors that provide the certificate cannot be the ones to perform again the abortion, which means you need another third party. In the case of rape and incest, again, you need a certificate from the magistrate. If you are a minor, you need consent from either a guardian, your parent, the Minister of Gender, or from the Children's Court. You also need permission from a medical superintendent of a state hospital, which means that the abortion can only be performed in a state hospital or in a clinic or a private health facility. But as of 2021, no private health facilities have been approved for this purpose. And in the case of sterilization, because it's Abortion and Sterilization Act of 1975, you need also the two medical practitioners and one a certificate from a psychiatrist, the same as also in the abortion situation. And you need written consent from the patient, as well as authoritative approval from the Minister of Health himself. So when you look at how cumbersome already the steps are, it sort of creates the assumption that the state is imposing its own vision of a woman's role to procreate, which comes back to our stance that this is state-determined procreation when we begin to unpack the act itself. And when we also know that abortion is only legal under if it's a threat to the mental health of the person carrying the child or the fetus, if it's under rape or incest, if it's a threat to, or it endangers the life, or if there's a serious risk to fetal impairment. So those are the only conditions. So outside of that, you would not then be able to access the law, and hence you find people, even under the Act, will not be able to access the specific services, and hence the clandestine, unsafe backdoor abortions. So it's to liberalize it, also to repeal this specific law. And when we contextualize it further, we know that this Act is an apartheid inherited act, and it was mainly conceptualized and put together because the aim was to restrict termination of pregnancy of white women because of the hysteria that the black population was outnumbering then that the South African apartheid administration. So it was very much also racialized. And so Namibia post-independence, of course, you cannot repeal all the laws, but we've still been operating under this act as if it has served any and all of the women in the country, because at the time it was to preserve white legacy, not to preserve the life of all women and girls that would be affected by this act. And majority would be black people right now. As Doctor has mentioned, there are a lot of structural barriers, right? Even in countries where the law has been liberalized or people have more options, of course there are structural barriers, like in South Africa, because of structural poverty, because of inequalities. And as much as it is accessible on demand, you still have so many other issues: comprehensive sexuality education, lack of information, lack of family planning services. Namibia had last year run out of contraceptives in the country, you know, and that again infringes on their reproductive autonomy and their rights to just choose and make choices about their bodies and their reproductive lives. So that is the perspective that we are coming from as well. And I think I do agree with Doctor on the various ways that it affects the lives, etc. So our perspective is really just that the law is legal, is already there, but it is not accessible, and hence we come from this perspective that there is definitely a level of state-determined procreation that is imposed on women's role to procreate in society, which is wrong.
Thank you. Pastor.
Yeah, it's thank you very much for allowing us to speak about this very important issue. Especially when I look at my perspective as a pastor and the society that I'm serving. We already have a lot of moral issues in the society that also we as religious leader is to address, and also to help out to see that people are living accordingly. Now, while you are trying to let this be, there are also things that are happening without any knowledge of the religious leader. And these things are happening, like if we say, in the darkness, and when it comes out, then it's already done. But still you have to work on the soul and also on the mind of the person to bring themselves back to them so that they can be healed in one or the other way. So when we talk about the legality and illegality of whatever the abortion is, you know, the church have a stand in which we are standing already, where we are standing, and the whole, actually the whole world know it. And I will go back as far as 1973, I think in France, a court was also in because of this same issue, where our church, all the Protestant churches and Catholic churches had their stand. But individual members in the church had also their own stand on that issue. So I myself will not speak about me, but I have to speak about the broader nation, about the broader society that is also in this problem that have to be solved in one or the other way. So for me, I'm just urging that we have to sit and speak about how do we make it legal, and how and what is it to be put into the place so that what is legal is not actually bringing us down to that extent that things are just happening left and right. Because in our society, when things are legal, we don't think about the next person anymore. We just do things according to my human being or whatever I am. The next right of the other person is not taken into consideration. So most of the time, it's just happening that I feel so, I don't want to do that. And that is where we have to stand and say, something must be done correctly before we say this is now legal and everything that we have put in place must be like that. So from my perspective, or from my church perspective, we still have a lot to do before we bring this issue as a legal, as a legal law in our country.
Okay. I think that even before we started our recording, we spoke briefly about a baby dumping that took place recently. You know, so I think baby dumping and the backdoor abortions are a big contributing factor as to why this is a topic of discussion at the moment. So I would just like to know, I can start with you, Pastor, what is your stance on these backdoor abortions that are happening because the people can't take, there are restrictions when it comes to whether or not you can get an abortion legally. And I also just want to mention this, there are a lot of funny little things that the people are doing just to abort the baby. Have you heard of, I heard of something very funny recently where they said that they take warm water and they put newspaper in this warm water and they drink that ink water to abort the baby. Or I've also heard of things of drinking cheek or drinking very funny things, you know, in order for these people to abort these babies. But the point of the question is, what is your stance on these backdoor abortions?
I'm really against it. I'm really against it because we speak about, first of all, when we look at the biblical side, a person living have their right and their way of doing things. But we are speaking about morality in the society. Our moral has went so low that things are happening and are done because what happened to me, I cannot come to any person and tell them, this is what happened to me, and I'm really seeking my help or your help to help me. And that is the first thing that is our society is not doing mostly. Or even if you go to that somebody to help you, again, that somebody is like of bringing you down into that level that you say, what does it help if I go to somebody and they are really not helping me, understanding me, what has happened to me. So, and that is where we have to start. Even if we legalize or whatever we do, these things are still going to happen because one of the things, we have less information in our societies. There are those people who are really living outside, how can I really put it down? They are not, the information that they need to have, they don't reach them. And most of the time is that the next person will give you the idea, just do this and it's finished. But the consequences, what will happen after that, that is where the people do not really think about. And we as a church, we say we are open to discuss such problems with people so that we can see how we will help you to go through this whole process. So our doors are open to people to come. But the problem is the society is still afraid to come and tell their story, what is happening with them, so that they can get help everywhere and anywhere. Yes.
Okay, Dilo.
Yeah, I think I've a couple of things to respond to. I think not to sort of dilute exactly what the pastor was saying, but I think I have picked up on a lot of things in the past years and in the statistics and in the information and the reports. So the one thing that pastor mentioned was that the right information needs to reach people, right, to make informed decisions. But I do want to say that the information has reached them. I think that the information is outdated currently. When you're looking at comprehensive sexuality education, it is not comprehensive as it should be, because right now people are still sort of operating under the current ABCs, abstain, be faithful, and use a condom. But we don't understand that there are so many structural issues in our country, right? When we're looking at power dynamics, when we're looking at the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence, when we're looking at rape culture, and even now teenage pregnancies that is now also compounded by statutory rape cases. Those are just not things that necessarily would just go away when we say when we preach the ABCs. It needs to be much more comprehensive, right? The other is when we are looking at, there was something mentioned about the soul and the mind, etc. And I know that it comes from a very much religious perspective. And I want to say and add that so many countries that have decriminalized recently, Argentina, Mexico, Ireland, even Benin recently, have all been very much religious states. But it is not the church that determines the supreme law in the countries. It's the constitution. And that is what guides and should guide every public office bearer to make informed decisions about the country and the people itself. I think I made a very important point, especially when we were giving our presentations of VCRC on why this current law must be repealed, was to say that the community voices that I brought into that conversation, right? Those ones that have gone to those backdoor abortions, those ones that have drank the jig, that used coat hangers to induce the pregnancies themselves, they are also definitely Christian. They are very much religion. But as much as that is a part of the component of their values and their value system, we must also look at the human rights of it as well, because nobody just denounces their religion just because they've gone for a backdoor abortion. I don't think that's the case. And in fact, even in those religious countries, they still do go access the safe abortions now, because it's not so much that you need to sideline your religious views, it's that you incorporate it with all of your other cluster of values, which includes human rights, which includes the right to access to healthcare, etc. The other point also that I wanted to add is when we're looking at what still needs to be done, I'd like to add that this act was inherited 46 years ago. There is so much that was already done, starting with the advent of the campaigns around HIV, starting even now recently when we brought in CSE into schools, starting now with, I think, this abortion debate that has been from the 1960s, that has already been brought on. But it was repealed at the time because at that moment, it was repealed at the time by the Minister of Health, because the late Dr. Nikki Yambo had first brought it in Parliament. Then it was again withdrawn by Dr. Libertina because of strong religious opposition groups. But I think again that we should not just consult one specific religious group. Firstly, because Namibia is a secular state.
It is.
And that is once again part of the value system in our country, to say we accommodate and we incorporate all these different value systems. We do not put another religion as supreme above all of them. Otherwise, I would then expect also my zone and other platforms to bring together the Christian groups, the Muslims, the Islams, and all of those others, so that also can be a platform for them to air out their views, because in other countries they have already legalized it, as much as they have been facing such heavy religious backlash. And another thing also you mentioned about baby dumping, I think that baby dumping and unsafe abortions are very starkly linked to the current restrictive laws. And that's why they continue to persist, because if we continue to restrict the laws, then again, as I was saying, state-determined procreation, they will go give birth and then again go dump the babies. Why? Because Namibia is also is considered one of the highest unequal societies in the world, second to South Africa, I think. So if we're looking at marginally how many poor black people are affected by this law, how many of us actually have access to medical care and can also afford to go to the borders? Do you know that over 83% of our public uses the public health system in the country? Only 17% have about access to medical care, including the 83% are also those ones that have different religious views, etc. So we cannot continue to sort of walk around eggshells around this issue, even as the church or even as someone that has a different religious view as someone else. What needs to be done is that we hold the fundamental human rights of the person that will be carrying this pregnancy and ensure that access to healthcare is available, it is affordable, it is accessible, and it is affirming enough for people not to go through backdoor abortions and all those other clandestine, unsafe manners, which then includes us also improving the structural issues in order for them to enjoy the law once it gets repealed. So that is the perspective I think I would like to add to what the pastor has mentioned.
Thank you. Doctor?
Yes, regarding the current status of unsafe termination of pregnancy and baby dumping in Namibia, if you were to ask me whether unsafe termination of or illegal termination is happening in country, most likely I would say yes. although without certainty, unless you have really seen it and you have seen a person performing it. But from the statistics that we are seeing, is that we are seeing a very high number of patients that are coming in with what is referred to as miscarriages. Because from our clinical point of view, we presume that if a woman presents to us with a clinical picture of abortion, because you'd understand that when you speak abortion and a miscarriage, the two terminologies are used interchangeably, but in clinical practice, when we speak about abortion, we mean that there was an intention by a woman to end the pregnancy for either social reasons or for whatever reason. When we speak about miscarriage, we usually refer to it as a spontaneous. But because of the current law that we have now, any woman that comes to us, we believe that they have spontaneous abortion or miscarriage, but we rather refer to it as miscarriage because we presume that they didn't do anything. But looking at the number we are seeing currently from our gynecological statistics on a daily basis, the complications related to miscarriages is the highest number of the patients that we are seeing, meaning that most likely it is happening. And we are seeing a high number of people that are coming to us late. So what does this mean to us? As I highlighted earlier on, one is the issue of high risk of dying. We have patients that we have admitted to ICU, or some of them even came in and they died on arrival because they came too late. And for us, we want to preserve life regardless of what happened prior, whether it was done illegally or for us that is not the case at that moment. We rather want to preserve life. And then the two is the treating the complications. What does it mean to the state? It doesn't come cheap to treat these complications. It costs money. Most of the women that when they come to us is that they come in very sick. They need antibiotics. They need blood. All this costs money. So it is very expensive to treat these complications. And on the other side is that the topic of discussion, should you now legalize termination of pregnancy? Two, also, as we have just spoken about earlier, that it does not really necessarily completely remove this unsafe termination. It will still be happening on the background, but probably on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
But also, during termination of pregnancy, it requires you to come up with a system. You can't just wake up tomorrow and tell us that termination of pregnancy or abortion is legalized. You need to come up with a system, and we need to understand there's a difference between legalizing. I think Pastor has highlighted to it. There's a difference between legalizing and having restrictive laws, and probably what we should be discussing is a restrictive termination of pregnancy, where it is done in a controlled manner, and how it's going to be done, when is it going to be done, and who is going to do it, because those are the key words. But if you come and you just say you legalize, you presume that you can just wake up and go to your neighbor and start saying that I'm pregnant and I want to end this pregnancy. So all this needs to be taken into consideration while we are discussing this law. So all this also, it will mean that it will also cost money at the end of the day. It will not come cheap. You need to employ people to do that. You need to also buy ultrasound machines to scan these patients and make sure that everything is really removed when they do a miscarriage. And also when you also need to clean them, you need equipment. So at the end of the day, you will understand that it is not just about saying that legalizing, but for us, it's what does it mean to us. We have seen that if you come in and you do legalize termination, it does reduce the maternal mortality rate or number of women that are dying. But at the same time, it also has the impact of costing. You have to plan, and it also needs to be very, very clear stated, and there must be clear restrictive laws, because if it's not done properly, it will also not solve the problem. It will probably lead to more complications, because now some people will start seeing it as an opportunity to make money and of some sort. So at the end of the day, I think we need to, as the law is under review, which I believe probably it is due for review, whether it is for pro-abortion or anti-abortion, we need to take into consideration, and I believe that, and I think that's the role of these public hearings, so that everyone, including the lawmakers, they are well informed of these implications and they understand, and then they will be able to come and make an informed decision which we think is good for Namibia.
Okay. Doctor, I actually also want to dive a little bit into the medical perspective of abortions. So before I get into that, I want to know, when is a fertilized egg a human being?
So this is it's a difficult question to answer. You need to understand that when there is life, so when a patient is pregnant, I would start it by saying it like this. When you are pregnant, the first thing that we look at is that we want to confirm that you are indeed pregnant. And how do we confirm that? We at least see the signs of pregnancy. One is that you have a pregnancy in the normal pregnancy test. The next thing is that you do an ultrasound. Then when an ultrasound, we are able to see the early signs of the fetus. And then usually the first sign of life, or to say that this fetus is going to develop, because having a fetus, it does not really necessarily mean that it is going to fully develop into a human being. So there are signs that we look at, and one of the first signs that we look at is the heartbeat. So we want, as early on in pregnancy, number one, we want to confirm that there is a pregnancy. It is there. It is in the right place. It's also very important. We are very much aware of other complications of pregnancy, like an ectopic pregnancy, where there is a pregnancy, but it is in the wrong place. So we want to confirm that there is a pregnancy. We want to confirm that it is in the right place, and we want to confirm that it is viable. And viable means that it is a pregnancy that is likely to develop into a full human being. And the first earliest sign that will show of a viability is what we call a heartbeat. So you'll find that there are signs that we look at based on a cutoff length of the size of the baby. If there is not a heartbeat, we'll call it what we call a missed miscarriage. Missed means that the baby has demised and is unlikely to progress to a normal baby. So in that case, that's what we call a missed miscarriage. And once there is a heartbeat, for us, it shows that there is a potential that this fetus is going to develop on to become a full human being. However, when it comes to clinical practice now, all these now are divided. You are very much aware that pregnancy is divided into trimesters: first trimester, second trimester, and the third trimester. And this is mainly to guide us in clinical practice. We know that in the first trimester, it means that it is early in pregnancy. Usually it is until about 14 weeks. Then from 14 weeks, then we go into the second trimester. So if a fetus comes out at this gestation, first trimester, there is no way that this fetus will survive outside. That is clear. And similarly, if we are to continue second trimester, which usually then starts from the 14 weeks to up to about 28 weeks, equally so, this is what we call a gray area, or what we call peri-viability. In clinical practice, we speak about viability, and viability to us, it just means that as clinicians, there is a cut-off weight, or weight of the baby, at which we expect that if this baby comes out, this baby will be able to survive, breathe on their own, or even with immediate support, and then eventually they grow and breathe on their own, and they are able to survive. So this is what we speak about viability. So in the second trimester, this is where there is a gray area of what we call peri-viability, meaning that there is a gray, depending on the resources. I'll give you an example. In Europe, a baby that is 500 grams that is born can grow on and grow on into a normal productive member of human being, productive member of the society. And that is depending on the resources, because those countries have well advanced resources. They can have advanced ICU technology. They can take care of these newborns, compared to our resources. For example, in the third world countries, including Namibia, a baby who is born for 500, we consider this what we call late abortions or late termination of pregnancy, because we do not expect them to, we do not have the facilities or the advanced, although maybe in private sector there is, especially in the public sector. For us, they are considered as late abortions because we don't have the facilities to take care of these babies, to be able for them to grow. So when we speak in the context of Namibia, the viability, and this is also adopted from WHO, is that we use 28 weeks. And that is equate to about 1,000 grams. It means that this baby comes out is about 1 gram. We know that if a baby comes out 1 gram, this baby can survive, lead a normal life, and be able to become a productive member of the society. And anything before 28 weeks or 1,000 grams, for us, it is considered as a miscarriage. And we also then divide them into the late miscarriages and the early miscarriages. And the late miscarriages is the one now that I spoke about, the second trimester, where also, depending on the resources, if a baby comes out 600, In private, this baby will be able to survive because of the resources, but in the state sector, we might not have advanced technology and the resources. So it's a very complex discussion, and that's where now to ask really when life begins. And for us, it's all about, from the professional point of view, what does it mean to us? So if you're asking me, then we'll say that for clinical practice, we use the viability. And that is just what I was trying to highlight and explain to you what viability means. It ranges from country to country, it ranges from hospital to hospital, even in the same country.
Okay. Because time is of the essence, I actually wanted to ask Dilo and Pastor if there's anything else that you guys would like to add from your own or onto what Doctor has said.
Very much. I think I would like to add just briefly on my own. I think the question around what are the next steps, what should be done, and I think for me is Doctor did touch on the systems, having to put together a coherent and comprehensive system to ensure that people don't just go about wanting an abortion. And I want to say that we must use our existing systems, because already the current act have the provisions for someone to obtain an abortion under those strict conditions. So we already sort of have the facilities. So it means that we need to just sort of reduce and mitigate the barriers. So remove these certificates that needed from the magistrate court, because by the way, for the magistrate court, you need to provide a good enough reason for why you probably also did not report on a specific rape case or incest, and that we cannot rely on a magistrate to once again use victim blaming or gaslighting and rape culture to deny them a certificate. So remove the 2 medical doctors that need to provide a certificate and then have in a third person. So that falls under just creating a new system, right? Look at what Zambia has done, for example, in the last years when they had liberalized their laws. They used sort of the medical, one of the best medical institutions where students go to study medicine, and used a pilot phase within a specific town, a specific district, and then they phased it out, because it's not necessarily going to be sort of just pushed onto people. And plus we already have the existing systems, which means that someone can actually go under specific conditions to obtain an abortion. So what we are saying is that everyone should have that choice regardless of what those choices are. So remove all of those barriers. I want to come back, for example, to COVID-19. So we all know about COVID-19, and we've had so many debates about whether you must be vaccinated or not. People have the choice to go get vaccinated, whether they want to or not. And of course also we had the issues where there were chance takers, where people decided to go and use other forms of vaccinations for people to, so it will always be there, and I think it will always be there in the medical field. So for example, even with oxygen, when the country had run out of oxygen at some point, they said no, people started selling their own oxygen tanks for huge amounts. So regardless of whether or not, we can't get stuck in, if it does get liberalized, that people will start doing what and what. I think that actually dilutes someone's agency and autonomy to decide for themselves. It infantilizes people. So let's also look at trained health professionals and not just reduce it to a medical doctor that's been trained for 4 to 5 years. Train the midwives, train the health professionals that would be much more available. And of course, this question about where life begins, I would like to also posit it to the church. Like under the current act, are you now also going to say that for rape, in the case of rape or incest, people don't question when does life begin. They don't bring in the morality question. They don't bring in this and that. So I think that also must just be do away with, so that we can just focus on the health status and the autonomy and the rights, the reproductive rights of an individual, so that we don't get lost in the quagmire of so many intellectual epithets that at the end of the day continue to digress and delay people's chances of getting an abortion.
Wow, thank you. Pastor?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very nice discussion, because you look at a very wonderful things like life. And when we speak about life, is from the very beginning, you go back to how God gives life to people to have life. And when we speak about conceiving, is also something else that you have to bring in. When is what conceived, at which time, and how it becomes life. And because of time, I cannot go in, because I wanted to give you also a discussion between 2 men and 1 woman. And at the end of the day, they have to repay the woman, because something happened to a woman because of of abortion. But the Bible doesn't mention abortion in stability correctly and said this is abortion, this is not abortion. But what I want to say is that our society have to go back in learning, doing things correctly. Not just opposing and imposing into the society when the society say no, it is done not right.
Yeah.
We have to do it correctly, and that is where we are swarming in people taking advantages of you see poor people that are going to those clinics and take the fetus out and all these kind of things. It's because the people are desperate. There is a moral issue in it, and there is also how the other people will think about me and all these things. So, and about the other thing that I also heard is that about the secular state. We are living, yes, in a secular state. We have a lot of religions, we have a lot of faith that are there. But still, if we don't come at one table, things are not going to be as it's supposed to be. So we have to sit and speak about what is for us and how we have to work really correctly to bring a law that will help our people to live a life.
Okay. Is there anything you want to
Yeah,
say?
no, thank you very much. I just wanted to add, just to say that the fact of the matter is that there's no doubt that for a woman to decide to do a termination of pregnancy, it's not an easy choice. It's a very difficult choice, and it does have a long-lasting effects, and you can also call it scar, because it's something that she's going to live with for the rest of her life. But the point is that we also need to understand that terminating is, as much as, like I said, it's not only it has both physical, it has psychological effects, and it can adversely affect the woman's life and functionality going forward. So it is also very important that we also need to understand that this termination of pregnancy is not a way of contraception. I think it's something that we need to be aware about, is that we also need to come to a point where we need to prevent to getting to the termination of pregnancy. Because what we have seen, I'll give you an example, is that in South Africa you'll find a woman is coming to the termination clinic 3 or 4 times in a year. That is, it can be a mistake for the first time, it can be a mistake for the second time. It also highlights, although we understand that yes, it's my right to come back as much as I want, there is also physical effects. We have seen patients that become infertile because of the terminations of pregnancy, and then later when you really want to conceive, you can't conceive. There are effects of, there are also adverse medical effects of termination of pregnancy. So we need to be aware of all these effects. So it is also important that we need to promote contraception.
Yes.
It is one of the effective way of preventing unwanted pregnancy or unwanted, although termination of pregnancy should, even if it's there, it should be the last resort per se. So we need to understand all this, and especially what we are focusing on the pregnancy, but there is also another big elephant in the room, which is the sexually transmitted infections that are not spoken about. HIV is on the rise, syphilis is on the rise, and all this we really need to promote the culture of what we call dual method of contraception, which one, it will prevent you from getting pregnancy, and then 2, it will prevent you from getting sexually transmitted disease. And then then when it comes now to a point where really someone made a mistake, and then those are the times then where now this discussion comes in, that there should perhaps be an option for these people to have a chance to do now termination of pregnancy, and then obviously after the termination of pregnancy you also once again bring in this discussion of contraception. So you realize that when we speak about post-abortal care, which is it's a clinical term, we say if a patient has a termination, contraception always comes in, and it's something that we really need to be aware.
I wanted to be clarity on something just very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't want us to also sort of create this pathology around people that go and access an abortion are always going to be depressed or psychologically, affected, etc. Because if that is the case, then we should probably be having much more, we should be talking around mental issues much more in the country and people accessing the service, which again is not as accessible as we know. So I also just want us to veer away from pathologizing everyone's experience, because I would say that there are statistics and studies that have shown that those ones that have gone for the safe abortions do not necessarily have all of those adverse effects as has been mentioned with depression and all of that. And also because when we're looking at, for example, Namibia, South Africa, we have the same structural issues of poverty, etc. And of course, then you find also the stigmatization that adds on to the mental health, whether you get an abortion or if you are pregnant, if you find yourself pregnant, there's always this stigmatization of marriage, of this and that, that contributes to the mental health. And of course, the moral backlash and the religious backlash as well. So I think those are definitely the heavy contributors of the mental health and the depression. But otherwise, if you find other countries that are a-religious, that actually have the abortion law, you find that the country's productivity is high, women are thriving, everyone is thriving, etc. So I don't really want to pathologize everyone's experience as just one. So I think I just wanted to add that.
All right. Well, thank you so much to my lovely panelists for joining me today. I personally found this discussion quite informative and fruitful. And I also just wanted to add on to what Doctor said, that at the end of the day, contraception is important, because it's because people are not condomizing or using contraceptives that we are ending up in these problems, you know. So I think it's very important for our viewers to know and to be informed about, you know, everything that's happening around us, whether that is contraceptives, and also whether if our government does legalize abortion, that they need to inform themselves of all the necessary information that they need to know when it comes to these things. Well, viewers, thank you so much for tuning in today. From me, Madeleine Garces, I'll see you guys on our next episode.